This is extra here too. Let's sit down so we can listen and learn more about.
Okay, good morning. My name's Gary Matsuoka, and we're here at Laguna Hills Nursery in Santa Ana. It's still winter, but it's summer-like temperatures, so we're going to be promoting tomatoes. First thing, we'll talk about how to start them. Now, most people just buy seedlings like these that the growers have grown for us, but certainly it costs less if you have a big garden to buy the seeds. The way we usually start them, because we do a lot of seed growing too, is we'll have them in a tray. We'll have these little trays that you fill with soil. We usually use our acid mix, which is considered sterile. Fill the dirt in here, get it nice and moist, put the seeds in very shallow, and then put them in an enclosed container. Now, the reason we do that is because the evaporation cools off the dirt. So if this is an open top and the water's evaporating, the dirt stays a little cooler than the air. With the cover on top, it'll keep it a little bit warmer. So we know that at room temperature, about a third to half the seeds will grow. If you have this in a sunny window, it gets nice and toasty here, like close to 100 degrees, you'll get all of them to sprout. So they sprout much better at warmer temperatures than 70. Although a few will start at 70, we get a lot better start when you're above 90. So if you like the recent days have been so warm, you can just set this outside to get a few hours of sun on it and then bring it inside at night to keep it from getting too cool. Take it back outside in the daytime. I would say filtered sun. Although, if you have it in full sun, it may still be okay. Get a little hot in there, but the tomatoes seem to like the heat. So starting tomatoes, you need some heat. So you can do them from seeds, you can get the seedlings. Seedlings, say this big or at least a month ahead of the seeds. Now we do have a very long tomato season here. So tomatoes flower and set fruit the best between 55 and 85 degrees. It gets much above 85 during the day. They don't set fruit quite as well. So a lot of times late summer, you don't have any fruit on your tomato plants because it's been warm. But early summer, yeah, you have plenty of fruit on the tree, on the plant. So a lot of people like to get their tomatoes in the ground by January, even though it's chancy because of the weather this year. We had a lot of rain at times, and that can cause diseases, but they would like to see their tomato plants by the time we hit the perfect weather, which is usually about mid-March, although we have it right now. I mean, we have the perfect weather right now. Usually it's mid to late March when we hit 55 at night and less than 85 in the daytime. And they want their tomato plants to be already 6 foot tall by then, so they get a full crop on them. But most of us start later. We don't want to chance the rain as much. Now, we will have a different version of tomato plants. So the other ways you can start tomatoes, if you get a good sized tomato plant, just break off a piece of the stem and stick it in our acid mix, it usually grows. So they're done by cuttings also. So if you get now the last type of tomato you can grow is grafted. So we'll be getting in grafted tomatoes. We're actually getting them next week, but they will be tiny grafted tomatoes. We have to grow them for about a month before we can sell them. Sometimes a few weeks that gets them going. So grafted tomatoes are used in hothouses a lot. So hothouse farming is where a lot of the heirloom tomatoes in the supermarkets are from. And hothouses are real expensive compared to an open farm. Real expensive to run. So they want the plant that can produce the best and the most. And the grafted tomato plants, what they do is they'll grow seeds of a wild tomato that's really strong, selected wild tomato that's really strong. And then they cut off the top and graft on a branch of the tomato they want. So this tomato they want now has super strong wild roots, better performer than the plant on its own roots, because a lot of these, especially the heirloom tomatoes, were chosen for flavor, not for production. They're chosen for having the best flavor, the most unique look, but they're not necessarily the best performers. So when they put it on a wild tomato root, suddenly you get this monster plant that, you know, we've seen like brandywine. When I grew brandywine in my yard, I used to get 1 or 2 tomatoes per plant, but they were wonderful tomatoes, but only 1 to 2. Got a grafted one, and right away it had half dozen on it. When it was real small, I was going, well, this is great. So they're just a stronger, more productive plant because they've got the wild roots. So that'll be the grafted tomatoes. We don't order that many because the growers grow them for hothouses, so you have to buy over 100 at a time of one type. So we just ordered 2 varieties this year, Brandywine and Berkeley tie-dye. So the bigger tomatoes generally are the lousier producers. You know, around here, the cherry tomatoes do wonderful. The medium-sized tomatoes do wonderful. It's the bigger ones that have some trouble with production. We don't have quite the right climate for them. They say all the big heirloom tomatoes love Tennessee or Missouri, where it's, you know, 90 degrees a day and 85 at night. That's what they like. We're like 85 in the day all summer and 60 at night. So we're just cooler than some of the heirlooms want. Okay, so that's the different ways. Now, the seeds can be quite expensive. So there are inexpensive seeds. The ones we call heirlooms, usually they just take the fruit off the plant growing outside and save the seeds, and that's your heirloom seeds. And they're relative, like these are 10 cents each. But some of these hybrids, like this one and this one, Sun Gold and Supremo, are hybrids. They run, see, $5.99 for 10 seeds. So that's 60 cents a seed. This one's $4.99 for 10 seeds, 50 cents a seed. They're way more expensive because the hybrid process is usually in a lab or greenhouse. So the hybrid seeds, what they do, so a hybrid is a baby of 2 heirlooms. So we have an heirloom that's real, you know, the heirlooms are usually more distinctive. You know, people have saved this because it's really tasty or it's really pretty. So they'll have 2 heirloom plants, and they maintain them either by taking cuttings, so they can, you know, tomatoes on their own roots, you get maybe 3 years out of them if you have a greenhouse, but you can take cuttings and keep that line, that genetic line, going pretty much forever by taking the cutting, starting a new plant. So what happens with plants is when the container or the ground they're in gets too full of their own dead old tomato roots, they usually give up. So if you take a cutting and reroot it, take another cutting, reroot it over and over and over, you can maintain that same genetic plant by cloning it. And then you have these 2 different plants, and you take the pollen out of one and put it into the flower there. Now, tomato flowers, which usually hang, have the female part in the center and the male anthers on the sides with the pollen in them. And usually on your plant, they release the pollen and it falls right onto the stigma of the female right below it. So it's self-pollinating. And then the fruit forms up in the ovary of the flower. So that's how, so what they do is they'll have one plant designated the male. So they'll take the pollen out of this one when the pollen's ready. They'll cut off the anthers of the plants on this side and put the pollen on there so that there's no chance it's self-fertilized. It's the pollen's from that plant. And what that does makes a hybrid. So hybrids, well, heirlooms, which have been bred over, are just selected over and over and over and over and over. generally what happens is most plants have two sets of chromosomes like we do. And the two sets of chromosomes in an heirloom are generally alike. So this one has two sets that are alike, this has two sets that are alike. If you cross those two, you'll get a hybrid that has two different sets of genetics. And usually those are stronger plants. Not always, but usually they're stronger because they've got more genes in them over the, a wider spread of genetics. So they're usually a little stronger, a little more productive. They may not be as distinct as the heirlooms because the heirlooms have two sets of the same genetics, but the hybrids are, have a more rounded genetics. Like my wife is German, Scott, and I'm Asian Japanese, which is really Chinese, Korean, it's all the same thing. And you mix us together, our kids are hybrids. And, they tend to be healthier just because of the wide variation in genetics. So same with tomato plants, the hybrids are usually the stronger ones, and they can select them for different things. Now, over the years, most of them have been selected to have stronger roots that are more resistant to diseases. So the majority of the hybrids selected were selected. Now, it may be just natural, and all hybrids are more resistant to disease, but the ones they selected, the combinations they use, were primarily for root health. Now, you can take a hybrid and turn it back into an heirloom, and a lot of growers do that because the hybrid seeds are so expensive that they'll just take a hybrid and grow the seeds from that, and you eliminate the ones that look like the parents, save the one that looks like the original hybrid, because when you have two sets of genes, you cross them. Supposedly, if it's a pure cross, half the offspring will be the hybrid, and then the other, there'll be a quarter that look like one parent, a quarter look like the other. So when they're taking the hybrid plants and growing them, and then they eliminate the ones that look like the parents and save the hybrid, if you do that like 7 or 8 generations in a row, you'll come back to having two sets of chromosomes that are fairly alike again. So they call it heirloomizing a hybrid. And a lot of companies do that because it's cheaper to take the seeds that are heirloom than it is to make the original hybrid cross. So we have plants of both types. Well, I'll mention which one we usually get because the hybrid seeds are so expensive. So it's not GMO. I mean, there have been a few GMO tomatoes where they actually take the chromosomes and add some weird chromosome to it that's not a tomato. They did that on one that they wanted to have a better shelf life, so it just didn't didn't over ripen. But no one ever really liked the flavor of that one, so it's no longer on the market. So these are natural crosses done in a lab. And then,
Gary, when you say they separate the seeds, can you see it with the naked eye, the difference in the seeds?
No. So you have to grow the plants from these seeds, and then when they make the tomatoes, you have to say, okay, this is like the hybrid I want. These two are like the two parents, or they're not. They're not like the hybrid. So you just don't save the seeds from those.
Okay.
And you have to do it 7 generations before you can say, okay, now these seeds are pretty much going to make the same plant. But it's not. It's similar, but it doesn't have the genetics that the original one did, but it resembles it.
Okay.
So the heirloomized hybrids generally aren't as good as the original hybrid, but they're close.
You can tell from the leaves, where the leaves look.
No, just the way the fruit tastes and the fruit looks.
Oh, you have to wait for the fruit to come in.
Right. Yeah. Now, we grow tomatoes are seeds, so they're called varieties. They're not cultivars unless you take cuttings or you get a grafted one. Those are cultivars. tomatoes are varieties because every seed is even though it's a similar cross between two parents, it is genetically different. Just like you and your brother, me and my brothers look all different, but we're close. And you can tell we're from the same family, but we're not identical unless you have a twin. So, and I do have twin brothers, but they're not identical twins, which is interesting. One placenta, apparently 2 sperms. So that's interesting too. Anyway, tomatoes, hybrid versus heirloom. Heirlooms tend to be more distinctive looking. Hybrids tend to be sturdier and more productive. And then also there's determinate tomatoes. And indeterminate. Now, most of the tomatoes we sell are indeterminate. So the style of growth they have is there's one central vine, and then as they grow, they start flowering, and they just keep flowering and flowering as they grow. So you'll have the youngest part of the plant on top. They'll have some flowers up here, and then the middle of the plant, you'll have some developing fruit. And at the bottom of the plant, which is the oldest part, you'll have fully grown fruit. They can side branch, make side branches too that do the same thing. But everything's kind of in succession. They keep blooming as they grow. That's indeterminate. Determinate tomatoes grow like, if you know how peppers grow, they just branch and branch and branch, and then all the branches bloom at the same time, and all the branches ripen at the same time. Now, when that crop is done, they will continue growing and make another crop with another set of fruit. That's how peppers operate. So that they're not limited to the one crop, but a lot of farms do especially the farms that grow ketchup, tomato sauce, they'll do this. So all the entire field's ripe at once. They just harvest everything at one time and they're done. Whereas this is how ones in hothouse are grown, so they can continue picking off the same plant for a long time. So that's indeterminate. Most people want indeterminate. We usually only carry a couple of determinate tomatoes. Most people want the indeterminates. One determinate, I think, is Celebrity. But the vast majority are indeterminate, so that you can harvest over a long period of time. Okay, so there's quite a few ways to train them. Now, most people don't train their tomatoes at all. They just let them grow. And that's fine. My house, that's pretty much how we do. We just put it in a container now. Container size, if you get a 5-gallon bucket, now, if you grow them in containers, we'll use either our top pot or our acid mix. Most people will choose the acid mix that holds a little more water. On the downside, it tends to shrink a little over time, but for tomato, we're only growing it for 3 to 5 months, so it's not a big deal. So we use those soils. Now, the one thing about tomatoes is they can take the worst soil imaginable. They're not picky about the soil. So, we think our acid mix and our top pot are better than anything else in the market, but tomatoes grow on anything. So you can choose a cheaper, as long as you don't mind throwing it away at the end of the season, because most potting soils are good for 3 to 5 months, maybe 8 months max for the best potting soils other than ours. Whereas ours you can reuse over and over, but the problem we have is that you can't grow a tomato in the same soil twice in a row. So just like any other crop, you've got to rotate crops. So if you buy new cheap soil, you can just throw the soil away and get new soil and put it in there. If you use our soils, you can grow them 1 year, but the next 2 years, you really can't grow them. And even 3 years is the best, not to grow them for 3 years. And so you just have to use the soil for something else because it has pieces of the dead tomato roots from the previous crop. So anything related to tomatoes, which are peppers, tomatillos, eggplants, potatoes, they'll have the same problem. They don't want remains of the last crop in there. If it's unrelated, corn, beans, squash, no problem. So you just have to, now we know a lot of people, that's all they want to do is grow tomatoes. So you'll have to buy new dirt. So that, and for those people, you might want to get cheaper dirt. Sand works just fine. Sand's the least expensive potting soil, it's just heavier. But again, this container is kind of small. You can get maybe a half dozen big tomatoes to grow in this, or 50 or 80 cherry tomatoes. A 15-gallon pot's much better. You can get a pretty good full-size plant in that. So again, we're talking about training. So if you let it sprawl, a lot of people want their tomatoes just to sprawl. We'll use a tomato cage. Now, this is kind of small. It would break after about 4 or 5 months of use because they're not very strong either. This is more realistic. It costs 10 times as much as that, but it'll last at least a decade. You'll get way more use out of it. This is one of the collapsible tomato cages where you can just fold it up to store it or fold it out to use it. So if you don't like to train it too much, this is an easy way. You just, you can put this outside the container. You might be able to bend those legs to get them inside and just keep the branches within it and let it spill out that way so it doesn't lay on the ground. Now you can lay them on the ground. I mean, a lot of farms just lay their tomatoes on the ground. So when they're on the ground, you tend to get more fruit that tends to get eaten by bugs and rot. When you train them up, the big worry is sunburn because you've got less foliage covering the fruit. So it's, it's a trade-off. Either way, you can do it. Now in hothouses and on a lot of farms that are growing heirlooms, they have a totally different method of growing tomatoes. And a lot of our customers do this too, the ones that are real serious about growing tomatoes. So if you just let a tomato plant grow without trimming it, it can be at least 5 foot across if it's supported, or 8 foot across if it's just laying on the ground. They take up a lot of room. Hothouses don't want to work that way, so what they do is most of them use containers, and they'll have these containers so that the plants are 2 feet apart as they grow. And they'll just allow one stem. Any side branching, they just cut it off, pick it off, cut it off. Because at 2 foot between stems, the foliage covers almost the entire room. So you really can't, if you want to be super efficient and make up the most room in your greenhouse with good production, one stem every 2 feet is the best you can do. If they're closer than that, they start shading each other, their production goes down. They don't have to be farther than that, because if farther than that, then you're wasting space. But at 2 foot, everyone considers 2 feet the ideal space in between single branches. So we have customers in their garden who do 2 feet between plants. And that way you get max production. Now, most people don't need max production, but if you're one of those guys that likes to challenge your neighbor, that's what you do.
So when the branches tend to grow out,
Right. They'll cut off they make branches with flowers on them, they'll keep those, but anything that's just another foliage branch, they'll cut that off. And once you grow tomatoes for all, you can tell which are which. because the flowers show up right away on the side branches.
And in a pot like this?
You can. So I had a friend who was a tomato expert, and he used to grow. He had a nursery, so he had access to a lot of cheap dirt. But he used to plant, he told me he used to plant 400 of these every year with a single 8-foot stake in it. And he would just grow one stem up each one, and they'd be almost can to can distance. So he lined them up and used to get wonderful crops on just, one container.
For secure plants.
Yeah. And then just attach this one stem to
Right.
that.
Right. So that's how he did it. He was, in his earlier life, he was a tomato grower. And he did consulting, in Asia and here on how to, on hothouse tomatoes and all that. So he knew his stuff, but every year he used to grow 400 of them in pots this size. Yeah, he was one of the top tomato speakers that used to go around nurseries back in the 1990s and early 2000s. Back when we had a bigger store in Lake Forest, he would come and we'd have 300 people at a class that he was lecturing at. Everybody knew him, so yeah, we had some incredible classes.
Is there an advantage or disadvantage if you have a raised planter, put it right into the raised planter, or have a pot in the raised planter?
Well, okay, so that's this next subject. So in containers, the advantage and disadvantage of containers, one advantage of a black plastic pot, especially this time of year, is it's warmer in there. So the ideal soil temperature for fast growth is around 80 to 90 degrees, somewhere in that range, 80 to 90 degrees. And this will do it. The ground can't do it. A raised bed's a little better than the ground. Containers even better than a raised bed, because especially if it's black. If it's white, it stays cold, or if it's clay, or if you use a grow bag, they stay colder. They stay real cold because they're evaporating right off the sides. The black plastic is warm, so it really gets them going. Now, of course, in the summertime, this gets a little too hot, but you can cover it, and it'll be about air temperature if you cover it. So you can do that. So container growing does have advantages. The ground is better all summer, usually. Again, raised beds are a little faster than the ground. When you raise the soil up, the air tends to get into the soil easier, and the more air you have, oxygen you have around the roots, the more vigorously plants grow. Whereas if you have heavy soil, if you have sandy soil, no problem at all. If you have heavy soil at ground level, it tends not to have as much airflow to the roots, so they tend to be a little slower. So, and again, the more airy the soil you put in there, our acid mix and our top pot are both about 50 to 60% volcanic rock or something similar, so they breathe really, really well. But again, we've used sand in the past, and that's fine too. So anyway, train it straight up, a single stem. Now in hothouses, because they're controlled environment, they can have the same tomato plant for like 3 years. And the way they handle these plants is they've got a spool of twine at the top that they hang down, and they clip the vine to it for support. And so the vine will have, of course, leaves, and it'll have developing flowers, about here, and then the developing fruit, and near the bottom you'll have the ripe fruit. And as this plant grows, they'll just clip it higher and higher. And then there's a point at which everything starts moving upwards. The developing fruit's now going up with the time. And what they do with this is they will strip off the leaves below the developing fruit. And they'll lower the spool of twine so that they have bare stems on the floor of the thing with the living plant going up the twine. So they can just take that plant and lower the stems on the ground. They don't want leaves on this, so there's no disease if you have no leaves there. And they have that plant for 3 years. Now there's more than one way to grow tomatoes in green hothouses. Some growers use a gutter system. And they actually use rain gutters because they're so available. And they'll have them maybe 6 foot off the floor. And they'll have, this will be hydroponic. So let's have a naked tomato in there and it's hanging over the side with fruit on it. And every so many months, they will stuff this, they will take the leaves off the stem, stuff it further into the gutter so it develops roots. So they're pulling the plant up into the gutter so that the tomatoes keep hanging right about here. So they just keep rerouting the stem over and over and over. Sometimes they'll lift out the bottom end, which has the oldest roots, and cut it off. But that's the gutter system of growing tomatoes hydroponically. Okay, so most of us will just grow them naturally in pots or in the ground. Irrigation-wise, all throughout agriculture, the last several years, they've been telling us the more consistent the moisture in the ground, the better the plants do, which means that you water constantly. So in the old days, it was always water once, a long time ago, it was water once a week, because that's all farmers knew how to do. They opened the floodgates, flood the fields, and then let it dry for a week, then flood it again, let it dry for a week, over and over and over. Nowadays, we have drip systems, or, you at your home, you can devise different methods of watering. But now farms water at least once a day. All the farms water at least once a day, and some are going even more than that. So they found no disadvantages by watering constantly. The water districts tell you if you water infrequently, you get better, deeper roots. You can train the roots to go deeper. No, you can't. You can't train roots to go after deeper water. So when they actually did the testing, they found that daily irrigation made better roots than weekly irrigation. So just water a lot, water frequently.
So if you have a plant in a bucket like this,
Mm-hmm.
how much water do you need to give it every day?
Well, if you stuck this in here, once a week is going to be enough because there's so much wet dirt in there, it's not going to dry out. But as it gets bigger, say up to here, daily irrigation is going to be, you want to keep the soil looking damp on top. That's important.
On top.
Yeah, once it's dry on top, okay. So what we noticed over the years, if the soil is dry looking on top, it's no longer saturated at the bottom, which means that there's plenty of air throughout the soil. It's not that important to make it dry or unsaturated anymore. I mean, if you use a compost-based soil, which most potting soils are, you've got to let it get dry on the top. Otherwise, it stays saturated, and saturated compost-based soil doesn't have any oxygen at all, which tomatoes can get by with, but they're not happy about it. So, but with our soil, you can keep it looking pretty wet. So just keep it on the wet side. Won't hurt the plant. Fertilizer-wise, they don't use a whole lot of fertilizer. The organics are generally better in the long run. So we have this down-to-earth fertilizer. We have this true organic. Those are the two organic ones we carry, although chicken manure we also have. That works too. They don't need a huge amount. In containers, you'll need a lot more than in the ground. So in the ground, you might fertilize it once, and that's pretty much all you need to do. In containers, you'll have to watch it. So what happens if they run out of nitrogen, which is the fertilizer that's most volatile and tends to leach out the quickest, your foliage starts turning lighter green and starts picking up a purple tinge. And that means you're running out of nitrogen. So they can still produce a lot of fruit without much nitrogen, but the plants just look terrible when they run out of fertilizer. We use a lot of osmocote in the nursery, which is the time release. So fertilizers in pots, you might have to touch them up every month or two. With osmocote, this time release lasts 6 months, which may be the entire life of your plant. But again, in the long run, the organics are better. Now, tomatoes, because they're a short-lived plant, it's not that big a deal. This is not quite as good as the organics. This has, I think, 10 or 11 of the nutrients that plants need, whereas organics have all 13. But the last 2 are micronutrients that are probably already found in dirt. So generally, you can use a real complete chemical like this, or you can go to organics. We use this one in the nursery because, well, a couple of reasons. It works quicker. Organics may take a week or 2 to break down and start working. Plus, EPA did some, their EPA is always going after nurseries, and they found out that the nurseries that use osmocote fertilizer had less runoff. Whereas a lot of these organics you put in a pot, it just runs through the soil out into the environment. But when they were using osmocote, they were very surprised that this did what it said, release a little bit at a time constantly, and it wasn't, not much of it was leaving the container. It was less than 10% leaving the container, which really surprised the EPA. So that's another reason we use this, so that the government doesn't come after us. Okay, so pests. Not many pests to worry about this time of year. We mostly worry about diseases from the rain. And there's so many diseases the rain can cause, but most of them, if you see a leaf getting a little black spot, that could be a bacterial infection, could be a fungus spot. Like this particular leaf here has a little brown spot on one edge, which may be a fungal or a bacterial infection. It's real tiny. Pick that off, you've cured the plant. So we go through the plants every so often and pick out the bad one, pick off the bad leaves. The problem, so that's, we don't want to spray fungicides. We just hate to spray fungicides on something you're going to eat. And the fungicides themselves are fairly expensive. So we'd rather not use them, just go by hand and pick out the bad stuff. Here's a leaf that's, not sure what happened to that leaf, but we'll just take that one off. And then one of the seed leaves it has also are developing little black spots. I'll pick that off. Now, diseases like fungi and bacteria, you usually have to have water on the leaf for a good 4 or 5 hours without moving to make the leaf catch a disease. So when it's raining or you're irrigating, there's no way a disease can start. You keep washing the spores right off the leaf so they can't get started. It's usually after you stop watering or after the rain's over, the drop of water sits there for 4 hours, then that disease can hatch out into the drop of water, enter the leaf, and cause diseases. So after rain is critical, and don't water at night. So if you water in the morning, that water is going to be dry within a few hours. The disease has no chance. If you water at night and it's a cool night, then it may stay wet long enough to catch a disease. So more watering in the morning, or if it's real hot, doesn't matter. But you want the water to dry off within a few hours of when you water it. When the plants are small like this, even if it rains, they're not in that big of trouble because, if you have a little plant sitting in the middle of your yard, it dries off pretty quickly. But once it gets about, this tall and it's full of leaves, then it stays wet longer. That's when you have to be a little more worried about the water on there. Here's a plant that went through the last rainstorm. It's history. So the main stem got infected. Once the main stem gets a disease on it, you can't save that. And there's, the problem with it is there, we have a handout from the University of California about 40 pages of diseases they can catch. It's just crazy how many diseases are actually out there. Now, there's a couple of serious ones too. So the ones we get this time are bacteria and fungus, which, easy to see, easy to cure unless they're on the main stem, then you have to start over. But in the summertime, there are some viruses that are nasty. So there's a bug called a potato psyllid. That's kind of a new bug, looks like an aphid, and they're out there. They weren't as prevalent 50 years ago, but just in the last 10 years, this has become more prevalent. It can be like a mosquito and spread a disease that cuts off the circulation to a tomato. We usually see this in the summer. We started seeing it about 10 years ago. So 10 years ago, they said down in San Diego coast, where they have some tomato farms, lost 40% of their plants. And down in Baja, they said they lost 80% of their plants. So what they do to stop this guy is they put a systemic in their field before they even plant, so that the bug takes one bite and it's dead. We do not promote systemics in a vegetable garden. In theory, a systemic doesn't get into the fruit. The systemic goes up through the xylem, which is the system from the roots taking water up to the leaves. And the fruit is supposedly attached to the phloem, which is the backflow from the leaves down to the roots. So in theory, the systemics don't get into the tomato. But I can't see how none of it gets in. I just can't figure out why none of it would get into the fruit. So I'm not a big fan of systemics on edibles at all, even though it's used a lot. But and we no longer have access to systemics. Homeowners don't, unless you have a special license to purchase it. But so on the potato psyllids, and it's a virus that they're transmitting, what you'll have a nice plant in your backyard producing good fruit, and suddenly one whole branch just dies. The rest of the plant looks fine. One whole branch, that's that virus. It cuts off the circulation right where they take a bite, and you lose the entire branch. We saw that 10 years ago. And then you lose another branch, the entire branch, but the rest of the plant still looks healthy. So we've seen now, and of course they can go branch after branch till you got nothing left. So what they're telling the farmers in California is grow your crops quickly, take them all, in other words, grow determinate tomatoes, get the crop grown, get it out of there fast, because you really can't stop this disease real well.
So what do we do in a home garden?
Just start over. Yeah, there's not much you can, you can, so they make gauzes that you can cover your entire tomato plant with that bugs can't get in. Because tomatoes don't have to be pollinated by bees. Most of it, it's done by gravity, where the pollen just falls right onto its own stigma and it pollinates itself. You might have to go in there and shake the plant a little bit to stir up some of that pollen. So you can grow a plant. That's why they can grow tomatoes, in hothouses without bees around, because they're usually self-pollinating. Now, when the temperature gets hot, a lot of the self-pollinating stops. What they say happens, so on a tomato flower, usually the stigma is longer than the anthers. So the anthers, the pollen drops right on the stigma. They said under real hot conditions, the stigma doesn't grow long enough. The stigma's stuck up here, the anthers are down here, and they don't self-pollinate when it gets real hot. You have to shake the plant really good to get that pollen to go upwards. You can spray.
Bees.
Pardon?
Or have bees.
or one other thing you do is you spritz the flowers with water and knock the pollen upwards. So, and they make sprays with calcium, and you can spritz the flowers. Now in July, that's when the tomato hornworms wake up. So I haven't seen them earlier than July. I used to be an insect person, so I used to keep an eye on, because I love the raised caterpillars, the tomato hornworms, the big green things that grow 4 inches long. Never saw anything activity before summer. And generally, the first week of a tomato hornworm's life, it's just tiny, less than a 1/4 inch. Second week, it's maybe 1/2 inch, and then the third week, suddenly it's 2 inches, and by its 4th week of life, it's 4 inches. It's eating the entire plant. So that happens in summer. We usually use, now you can use, there's a dust that you can get, or a spray you can get called BT, but we'd rather use spinosad. So in the old days, we all used BT, which is a bacteria, and it's interesting how they make that. They get a whole bunch of caterpillars, make them all sick, freeze dry all the dead caterpillars, and grind up their bodies and throw it in a bottle. And that's BT. It's a caterpillar disease from dead caterpillars. You spray it over your plant, doesn't hurt people. Any caterpillar that eats its own dead body is going to die or get real sick. But now we use spinosad. So the problem with BT, you have to buy a new batch every year, and most people don't, because it's a living thing. It doesn't live forever. And the sunlight destroys this, so you put it on your plant, it lasts for a few hours, and then it doesn't work anymore. Spinosad, which is an organic product found in rum, we have a couple brands of spinosad, Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brew, and spinosad soap. Spinosad is a chemical found in a rum distillery made by bacteria, and it lasts 2 weeks on the plant. And for most vegetables and fruits, you can eat it the next day. So they say, wait 1 day before you eat this. It's used in veterinary medicine a lot. So my dog's flea tablet was spinosad. You feed a dog pure spinosad, and it kills all the fleas in the outside of its body. It's just wild how that works. But again, it's in rum. So we probably eaten it ourselves. But anyway, spinosad lasts 2 weeks on the plant. It takes 2 weeks for a tomato hornworm to reach damaging size. So if you sprayed your tomato plant once a month, starting in July with the spinosad, you won't see it. You won't notice any damage. Tomato hornworms go from July to about November.
I always wonder, you wake up in the morning and then you see a big hornworm like this. Where were they before? It's on the plant.
Yeah, you just don't notice it until it's bigger. And usually by the time you notice it, it's almost 4 weeks old, or is 4 weeks old. So it's a 4-week life cycle. They pupate, so when they're mature, they dig a hole about 6 inches into the dirt and form a chrysalis underground, and they hatch out. The adult moth looks like a hummingbird as it flies. So they fly around at dusk, and they just do this. They dive down, lay an egg, come back up, dive down, lay an egg, come back up. The eggs are about a 1/16 of an inch in diameter. You can see them. If you've got good eyes, you can see the eggs on there. But again, I've never seen them before summer starts. This year it's much warmer, we'll see, but I've never seen them before summer starts.
So you're saying spray prophylactically once a month?
You spray once a month, yeah, because you won't see anything on there.
Right, July through
October.
Okay.
What's interesting, I guess, natural nature is the last generation has the biggest caterpillars, so that they can make it, because they go on the ground and they won't hatch out till they go on the ground by December, and they won't hatch out till July, so they're there a long time. I used to raise them, so we saw that, and it's interesting that the last generation of the year is always the biggest. So,
And that, so that doesn't, it doesn't make a difference if whatever soil you use there.
they're there. They'll find you, unless you've got them under a screen or something.
Okay.
Okay, I think I've covered all of culture.
So I have my tomato plants in the ground. And when I go to prepare the ground, I dig it up and I find all these grubs in the soil. What are these grubs?
Grubs in the ground are beetle larvae, and they eat fungus in the ground. Now, so they don't eat plants directly, but the fungus in the ground is usually a symbiotic partner to the plants. So they're hurting it, although not usually fatally. So they say the ground, usually anytime you dig up any dirt, you find grubs because there's a lot of fungus in the ground that's there. If you got like 10 per square foot, you want to get rid of them. So we do have products that you can apply to the soil. They're not organic. Well, actually we do. We have beneficial nematodes. So on grubs, there's beneficial nematodes that will eat up the grubs in the ground. So you can spray that. That'd be an organic method. We do have other chemical ones that also kill the grubs. So, and those are chemicals used in vegetable gardens. They're not.
But the grubs don't eat it.
Not directly, but they can still damage them a bit. They said if there's so many grubs around, they just inadvertently cut the roots of plants. That's what they do to grass. They don't eat the grass roots, but if there's 10 grubs per square foot in the lawn, you just lift the lawn off because they this traveling through the ground, they cut the roots. So, but yeah, they're not directly hurting plants.
But you would spray it on the soil.
Right, the beneficial nematodes. Now, I should mention, so there's also bad nematodes. There's root knot nematodes that tomatoes can get. They make all the roots and look like strings of cottage cheese. So the roots are just all bumpy. Instead of just being like spider webs, they get all knotted. And that can mess the tomato plant up. There are beneficial nematodes that eat the bad nematodes too. Most nematodes are good. There are some bad ones that mess up the roots of plants. There are sprays that kill root knot nematodes also, and some of them are organic.
Excuse me, Gary.
Mhm.
This might apply as well. On my raised planter, it's been abused for a while, so it is all your soil, maybe a little sand in there too.
Mm-hmm.
What do I do? What do I do to prepare it before? Because I'm redoing the whole thing with tomatoes and everything. Should I just turn it over, add more soil, spray it with something?
Well, if you've grown tomatoes in there over and over and over, you can't fix it. You just have to you have to eliminate it.
Right.
Or just wait it out, wait a few years until the tomato roots are gone.
Got it.
So you really can't fix dirt. I mean, you can dilute the problems a little bit, but it's not helping that much. So it's better if you've got, if you grew tomatoes the year before, find a new spot, or sometimes in my yard, we just put them in pots for 1 year. So, and grew something else in the ground there. So farmers, a friend of mine who's a farmer, they do a 10 crop rotation cycle for all their crops. So they don't grow the same crop or a related crop for 10 crop cycles, which takes about 4 years, 5 years to go through 10 crops before they plant the same plant again. So then they don't have to worry about the dead roots from the previous crop. So a lot of these tomatoes, especially the hybrids, were bred to be resistant to tomato root diseases from the last crop. So that's why the hybrids got real popular in the 1940s and 1950s, 60s, because if people were only planting tomatoes and they wanted to plant them in the same plot, the hybrids would do better because the hybrids were bred to live among the dead. They were bred for that. So they can handle the dead roots from the previous crop better than the heirlooms can't. You have an heirloom, you put it in where a tomato was last year, it just turns yellow. But the hybrids tend to be better. They're not perfect. I mean, we tried it and we found the first year full crop, second year 80%, third year less than 50%. But they can still do it. Whereas heirlooms will just fail if you have them in where last year's heirloom was. So, okay, so that's disease in the ground. So there's a lot of diseases. The old tags used to say VNFT, verticillium wilt, which is a dead tomato root disease. N was stand for nematodes. F was fusarium wilt, which is another root disease. B was verticillium wilt. So there's quite a few things that they were bred to tolerate. So I don't know if the new tags say it anymore. Yeah, I haven't seen it done as much on the newer tags when they talk about the resistances. Yeah.
So Gary, you're the friend who grew 400 pots. So what you're telling me is then every year he discard that soil and put new in?
Mm-hmm.
What's he doing with all this old soil from 400 pots?
They had a big nursery. They would just throw it away. Yeah, most compost-based soils you can't reuse it because what allowed them to grow was the compost was fresher. Once it gets older, it's like sludge. You can't grow anything anymore. So they would just discard it. But you know, it was cheap. It was cheap to make it. So our soil, you know, just lasts forever, so you can keep reusing it. But then you have to watch out for rotating crops.
Right.
So I'll mention some of the root diseases. You have verticillium, fusarium, are a couple of them. And then nematodes were another problem. Okay, the varieties we sell, there's just too many varieties out there to mention anywhere near even a third of them. There's just so many. My aunt's nursery, after my uncle died, she had a gentleman come in and run it for her. And that kind of started the big marketing thing called Tomato Mania.
Yeah.
So that started at her nursery. One of her employees just decided to get, or one of the manager's employees decided to get like 400 varieties of tomatoes. So he had all these people growing tomatoes for him, and then they would send out newsletters to every home in Southern California. I couldn't believe it. I lived in Mission Viejo at the time, and I got newsletters from the nursery in Pasadena. It's like, what are they thinking? How much money do they have to send out at least 1 million newsletters?
How many responded?
Well, Tomato Mania did become a big thing, but my aunt's nursery went bankrupt after about 5 years of this.
Wow.
Because they weren't following the money. So the manager, at least my aunt got paid. But the manager, you know, he didn't have a good bookkeeper apparently. So after 5 or 6 years of this, they were like several $1 million in debt.
Wow.
So they closed that down. But that started Tomato Mania. So one of the employees who was in charge of that, I don't know if he's still doing it today, but Tomato Mania came from that nursery. And it was called Hortus in Pasadena. But yeah, there's too many tomatoes. So some of the main ones that are real famous, especially the early hybrids. So the early hybrids we still sell, you got Better Boy, Early Girl. Now, for some reason, I don't remember what Better Boy tastes like. That was one of the first tomatoes we grew, but I don't remember what it Early Girl's good. I do like Early Girl a lot. I think Early Girl has it's not bland. It's got more flavor in it. So that one's good. Those are famous back in the 1970s. And then the 80s, it was Celebrity and Champion. Were the big sellers. Celebrity, I think, is Determinate. Everything else is indeterminate. And then in the 90s, Big Beef came out. And everybody still says that's the most unusual. It's almost too perfect. It's not, I like the flavor Early Girl better, but Big Beef, the fruit it looked like a rubber ball. It didn't look real. It was just perfectly round. No creases, no nothing. It was just round. And the plants were resistant to just about everything you think of. One of my Big Beef plants made it to its 4th year. So really strong plants, really perfect looking fruit. Interesting.
So when you say it made it to its 4th year, you just left it
Left in the
and
ground.
just kept cutting,
We didn't do anything. We just left it there and made it to its 4th
and
year.
it still had fruit.
Well, 4th year it died.
Okay.
So it couldn't make it all the way through the 4th year, but we're amazed it lived that long. And those are days we had frosts. It made it through the winters. That was in the 90s. Lemon Boy also came out maybe a little before Big Beef. Lemon Boy is noted for production. And it wasn't quite a beefsteak. It was large yellow tomatoes, quite sweet, not real tasty, but everyone's always commenting on how much fruit the Lemon Boy makes. It just goes nuts. So these are all hybrid tomatoes. Now, right around the same time, from Japan came Momotaro. In Japanese, that means peach boy. In Japan, Peach Boy was a folk tale about a kid that everyone picked on, but he turned out to be really tough because of it. So Momotaro is a sturdy tomato, but that turns out to be our best seller over the years. We think it's related to Early Girl because it's very similar to Early Girl, a little bit different color, really good flavor. Good production, good flavor. It comes in yellow and pink, dark pink, actually rose color, and then the yellow. This is an heirloom version of it. Someone planted 4 seeds in here. so the seeds to the heirloom version are cheap. We don't have a lot of the hybrids yet because the seeds are expensive. February is not the month you grow your expensive tomatoes. So this coming month, well, it starts tomorrow, so hopefully in a week or so, we'll have the hybrid Momotaros, which are just more consistently really good. And they're from Japan, so they come with the Japanese label. You'll be able to tell it's written Japanese. So they have the original Momotaro hybrid, and those have been our best seller for a couple decades now.
The hybrid one.
Right.
And you have the hybrid now, and the heirloom are coming, or?
This is the heirloom. The hybrids should be here soon. They don't, again, February's too early for them to start a lot of the expensive tomato plants.
Okay.
Because we don't consistently have this weather in February. And over the years, it's been getting earlier. I mean, 20 years ago, we had our tomato class in April, because that's when the weather turned not winter anymore. And then 10 years ago, we started doing it in March. Now here am I doing it the last day of February. I could have done this 2 weeks ago because the weather's been so warm, but we don't have the plants yet. We didn't have the plants yet, and we still don't have the best of them until next month. So anyway, Momotaro bestseller. A lot of the top selling tomatoes, interesting, are from Japan. So another top seller for us is the tomato called Sun Gold, which is a cherry. That's Japanese. And they're also very expensive seeds. But these are the larger tomatoes here I'm writing down. So that's most of the big hybrids that are famous. Now, modern tomato breeding started back in the 1940s and 50s. Burpee did it. So Burpee is famous for that. They made the first one I think they did was Big Boy. And you know, they usually keep the genetics secret, but when one of the breeders was near death, he said that you know, they used black Krim from Russia as one of the parents to get the flavor they wanted. So black Krim has turned out to be a pretty famous tomato. Here's a crop that we grew from seed. But so the black tomatoes are actually red skinned, but their flesh inside is green. And because green through red skin looks dark, it looks like a black tomato. But a lot of the black tomatoes, like black Krim, and there's quite a few black ones, Cherokee Purple, what's it called? Black Seaman, Black from Tula. Black from Tula wins a lot of current taste tests. But anyway, the black tomatoes have a taste that's both salty and smoky. Real interesting flavors, salty and smoky. One year at my house, I grew 9 varieties of tomatoes, and the only one I couldn't get any ripe fruit off because the birds and the rodents wouldn't leave it alone. They ate all my black Krims. They didn't touch the other tomatoes. They went after the black. They love the black Krim. That was wild. It's not a pretty fruit. It's usually bumpy and got creases on it. But boy, the flavor is incredible. So a lot of the black tomatoes are popular now. And of course, the tomato that started the heirloom craze, Brandywine. So that was I think in the 90s when the heirlooms just came on board. Because Brandywine, you get a tomato and you eat it, it tastes just like tomato soup. Just like tomato soup. It's really, really good. But it's notoriously bad producer here because of our weather. They like it hot day and night. Now this year we might get it. We might get the hot nights. But they were bred in the East Coast United States. Brandywines also have what is called a potato leaf. So the leaves are wider like a potato. This is red Brandywine. But yeah, notoriously poor producers of wonderful tomatoes. So we are getting it might be 3 weeks now, we'll be selling the grafted Brandywines, which produce better than the non-grafted ones. I've had a grafted Brandywine in the past, and in December it was loaded. I couldn't believe it. In December, it was loaded with fruit. So So there's a lot of heirlooms out there, Brandywine being the most famous name, but there's, I mean, one interesting one is Mortgage Lifter, which is also known as Radiator Charlie. So a gentleman who owned a radiator shop, and they said he put it in the right spot, because that was back in the 40s and 50s. And he situated his radiator repair shop right at the base of a hill that the coal trucks would have to go over. And they would often overheat on the hill and come back down to his radiator shop and fix the radiators. But he was smart enough that he knew the guys at Rutgers. I don't know if that's in New Jersey.
Yes.
And he asked them, how do you make these good tomatoes that I like? So he got a whole bunch of different tomatoes and put them in a circle and got the seeds out of them and developed his Radiator Charlie, which is also called Mortgage Lifter, because he sold enough of them. In those days, he was selling them for $1 a plant, which was a lot of money in the 1950s and 40s. And he bought a home using the profits from his tomatoes that he bred. So that's a famous one too, the Mortgage Lifter. So there's some with some good names out there, but there's too many. I mean, there's too many. We have on a list at our nursery a lot of them on there. So among the cherry tomatoes, one of the first that I grew was Sweet 100. Back in the 80s, I grew Sweet 100. We still carry it to this day, and that's a good tomato. These skins don't split. So a lot of cherry tomatoes, the skins tend to split, which makes them more tender. Sweet 100s have a thicker skin, so they don't split. Whereas Sun Gold, which is better, might have better flavor, sweeter, the skins on Sun Gold tend to split when you wash them. So that's one problem with Sun Gold. I loved cherries when I was a kid. So the other tomato that is popular are these paste tomatoes like Roma. So Roma was developed, I guess, in Italy with less juice in it so they can make paste out of it better. We have Romas. So what someone came up with the idea is they cross. So the problem with cherry tomatoes a lot, you bite into them and it squirts all over the place. So somebody crossed a Roma tomato, a paste tomato, and a cherry tomato, and that first hybrid is Juliet. So Juliet is the original grape tomato. Still really good. So it's a cherry tomato that doesn't squirt, shaped like a paste tomato. So that started the grape tomatoes. And some of the famous oddballs, we have green zebra, which is kind of a yellowish with dark green stripes. And what's interesting is the green parts are a little bit tartar than the yellowish parts, so you get this nice flavor contrast when you're eating through the fruit. That's most of my brought. But yeah, there's just thousands of varieties of tomatoes. You go through a list of tomatoes being sold, it's at least 1,000 nowadays. Any questions? So this is the start of the spring season, and then there's always the start of the fall season too. So you know, if your tomatoes start getting diseased in summer, you just pull them out and you start your second crop in August, so that when we get to the end of September, when the temperatures are again perfect for growing fruit, you'll have them at that time too.
But isn't it kind of hot here in September?
Yeah, they won't flower well in September, but your plants will be growing. Then right when the temperatures reach the right temperature, which is October, November, December, then you'll have a big plant. So And our growers don't really grow tomatoes past mid-September. So you have to get them before mid-September, then they just stop growing them. Occasionally we have a cool fall. Actually, this last year was a cool fall. We had a real cool temperatures all November, just rain. So that would have messed up your crop if you had started at that time. Okay.